Arriving sometime in 2021, House of Ashes will be the third game in the Dark Pictures Anthology. In this video I'm going to be going over what we know about the game so far, and offering some wild theories about what it might have to offer. Let's start with the official description of the game from Namco Bandai's website. At the end of the Iraq War, special forces hunting for weapons of mass destruction unearthed something far deadlier. A buried Sumerian temple containing a nest of ancient and unearthly creatures. To survive the night below, they must forge a brotherhood with their enemies from the world above. This paragraph suggests that Supermassive is making its first openly political game about special forces operators trapped in a cave system along with partisans of some kind. Either Iraqi soldiers or forces from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I'm a little confused about the timeline though. The end of the Iraq War would place the game setting around 2011, but up until now the games have been set in the present day. This could just be a case of inartful scripting though, and the war they're referring to is the fight against ISIS. That ended in 2019 though, so who knows. Now let's move on to the trailer. The first thing we get is the same musical cue that every Western movie and TV show uses to let us know things are set in the Middle East.
You believe in God?
Absolutely not.
Then there's what might as well be the series' mission statement so far. A guy announcing that something supernatural is going on that he can't explain. This has happened in the last two games, and both times it turns out that there was a completely rational, if somewhat disappointing, explanation for what the characters saw. Then we get a visual of our main character, who the IMDb refers to as Rachel King, as played by Ashley Tisdale, from High School Musical and Phineas and Ferb. There's brief shots of two men firing wildly into the darkness. Notably, there's no sounds of them hitting anything at all, so this could just be another scene of characters getting panicked. Now we move on to the final scene of the trailer, in which Rachel walks through a pool of dark liquid, possibly oil, maybe blood, while a man with a Middle Eastern accent offers an ominous rundown of Sumerian hell. On-screen, Ashley walks past a large statue of Pazuzu, most famous in North America due to his cameo in The Exorcist. Then we hear a rattling monster sound, followed by a high-pitched screech. As you can see, there's not a ton of information offered here, so let's point out the notable things. First off, the developers have been careful to avoid letting us see any insignia on the characters' uniforms. The closest we get is this message on one of the soldiers' hats, which says, "Remember 9/11, with the 11 drawn as two towers of the World Trade Center. Could this be a flashback to earlier in the war? I mean, most people always knew that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, but the jingoistic fervor that swept the country in 9/11's aftermath makes this hat seem completely normal so long as this scene is set earlier in the war. Unless, of course, this character is one of those people who blames the entire Middle East for 9/11, and is down to shoot terrorists wherever he can find them. That could lead to some fun drama if he's forced to team up with someone from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I wonder who's narrating the section about the House of Ashes. You'd think it would be one of the Iraqi characters, but that seems like a stretch. The kind of partisans they'd be fighting would likely be Muslim fundamentalists, and their particular take on religious history makes them about as likely to know anything about Sumerian religion as American evangelicals are to know about the Druids. The Pazuzu statue is interesting because while the character is technically a demon, he's also a guardian figure responsible for keeping much worse forces inside Ker, which is what the Sumerians call the House of Ashes. There's a god named Lamashtu, who lives on the blood of children. Fearful people would wear Pazuzu amulets and pray for him to keep her away. With his monstrous face and snake penis, he seems incredibly threatening, but there's a lot more going on with him than what appears on the surface, which is kind of a running theme in the game so far. Now let's take a look at the gold-framed picture from the end of A Little Hope. As you can see, it involves Rachel having her line cut while she rappels down into a pit. At first I'd assumed that, like the picture of Anthony and Tanya from Man of Medan, this would be a death from the opening. We see that she survives the fall though, possibly by landing in a pool of dark liquid at the bottom of the pit. Here's something I find interesting. Despite the fact that we've been told that this is a military operation, she's not carrying a weapon of any kind. We can see enough of her body in these two shots to see that not only does she not have a rifle, she doesn't even have a sidearm holster on either leg. Maybe there's a gun stuffed into the backpack that she loses somewhere between these two scenes? She does manage to hold onto the shoulder radio, which is nice, although I can't hazard a guess about what happens to her sleeves. Here's a fun thing. In the postcard from Little Hope, the crescent moon that the witch is flying in front of has been rotated down, so that it matches the crescent moon on the curator's book. Now let's get a look at two pieces of supplemental material. First up is the banner from the House of Ashes page on Namco's website. You got Rachel covered in blood, oil, or whatever that is, the statue of Pazuzu, much better lit than we see in the trailer. Then we've got these bits of cuneiform writing etched into the wall. I have no idea where to start with translating them, other than the fact that this symbol means sky and also heaven. This carving of what might be Lamashta. I'm also baffled by the inclusion of a Mayan calendar on the image. It's hard to imagine anything that has less to do with Sumeria than a Mayan calendar, but there it is. Was it just added because it's creepy, or did the developers want people to be thinking about the Mayan apocalypse of 2012, 1 year after the end of the Iraq War? Then there's this image on the left, which is something called the Victory Stela of Naram Sin, a 4,000-year-old piece of propaganda depicting the victory of a king over a rival nation. Apparently, the fact that he's wearing a horned helmet means, in their culture, that he's declaring himself to be a living god. Is this a hint about the game's themes? That gods and demons may really just be men? Or is it just something they picked because it looks interesting? Here's another piece of promotional art. We can see more cuneiform writing, including the heaven symbol off by itself. But more interestingly, the artists have hidden away, upside down, 2 sets of 8-digit numbers. If you disregard the odd spacing choice and assume these are latitude and longitude numbers, we find that the game is set somewhere along this line. Sadly, the second number is covered up by the game's title, so we can't figure out exactly where it's set, although the mountains in the trailer suggest that it's somewhere up here, in the mountain range that separates Iraq from Iran. So, now that we've taken a look at all of the official information, what can we guess the game might be about? From the research I've done, I can see that there are a few decent options. 1. Jinn. Magical creatures of Arabian legend. They can shapeshift or become invisible, and cast curses on people, driving them insane. I don't know that they'll go with these, however, since Uncharted 3 had a bunch of jinn in a Middle Eastern cave as its finale. But then it turned out that it was all just a hallucination caused by a biological weapon, which made people see their greatest fears. That's right, Uncharted did Man of Medan years before Supermassive did. 2. Hyenas. This one seems like a stretch, I know, but myths about hyenas are kind of amazing. According to legend, they're incredibly smart, organized, and have the ability to mimic human speech to lure people away from safe areas so they can be eaten. There are even stories about creatures that can transform back and forth between hyena and human to better stalk and kill people. It's almost definitely not going to be hyenas, but that would be really cool. 3. The Descent-style subterranean troglodytes. The climbing scene added to the woman covered in muck are both reminiscent of popular movie The Descent, so I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that the villains this time were humans who have adapted to living in low to zero light conditions over thousands of years. Perhaps the nation of people conquered by Naram Sin in that stela fled under the mountain pictured in it and were gradually transformed into monsters? 4. Actual demons. This would be a huge departure for the series, but it's possible that, given his weird hybrid role, the Pazuzu statue is there to warn people that they've reached the entrance to the underworld, and that demonic creatures lie beyond that point. It would be a surprise if Supermassive Games actually did this, but maybe a welcome one? 5. Ghouls. This is my personal favorite, but it's also probably wrong. Ghouls are creatures of Middle Eastern myth, strange, warped humanoids who live in caves tunneled out beneath cemeteries. They survive by eating dead bodies, or in some stories, ambushing people and killing them in the dark desert night. Supposedly, they can take the form of the last person whose body they ate, allowing them to impersonate the dead. Yes, the cannibalism brings them pretty close to the Wendigos from Until Dawn, so Supermassive probably won't use them, but they're interesting in their own right as well. Fun fact, in the movie Night of the Living Dead, the monsters are referred to as ghouls because that's the creature their behavior most resembles. And Batman villain Ra's al Ghul is named after them as well. So, that's all I've gleaned from the available information about House of Ashes. I'm very excited to discover what Supermassive has in store for us next. And if there are more trailers, I'll be sure to check them out for further clues. Thanks for watching the video, and check out the channel for more Dark Pictures content. And if you know anyone who can read cuneiform, please send them my way so we can figure out what those symbols say. I've been the Hidden Object Guru, see you back here for the next thing, but until then, au revoir.